Hi there, Steve Coffin here, and we are now in week 9 of our 12-week or 90-day language challenge. In my case, it's Persian and Arabic. Many of you are doing other languages. We want to, in this sort of 12-week period, we want to achieve a breakthrough, and one of the subjects that always comes up is pronunciation. So obviously, I believe firmly that input is the key to language acquisition, and a lot of research supports this. And through input activities like listening and reading, we improve our comprehension, we acquire words, we acquire phrases, our overall skill in the language improves. What about the ability to pronounce, I wouldn't use the word correctly, but to get closer and closer to native pronunciation? Because our goal is to get as close as we can to the way the native speaker, and we can choose. If we live in Australia, we want to sound like an Australian, presumably. If we live in Quebec, we want to sound like a Quebecois. If we live in Taiwan, we want to sound like a Taiwanese person. Or we may not. We may decide that we prefer to speak with a Beijing accent or whatever. But the point is, we choose the form of the native speaker's accent that we want to try to imitate, get as close to as possible, but we have to be realistic. We are unlikely to end up sounding like a native speaker, like exactly like a native speaker. And that's okay. Most people who speak a second language fluently, eloquently, competently have an accent, and that is not a problem. And I think that's the first thing I really want to stress. The people that impress me the most when I hear them in English are those people who use the language well, who have a lot of words, who use the language accurately. The odd mistake perhaps, but a lot of words to express their thoughts. So that's got to be the goal. And usually, people who use the language well, who have a large vocabulary, who understand well, usually they have an acceptable accent. That means to say we can understand them. Because people who speak well usually have done a lot of listening and have done a lot of speaking. Because when we engage with people in the language, we also pick up on their accent, all right? We're very easily influenced by what we hear around us. So if you do the normal things in terms of listening and reading and speaking, your pronunciation will improve. However, there are some specific things I think that can be done to improve one's pronunciation, to get closer to the desired accent, which, as I say, it could be French from France, from southern France. It could be German from Bavaria. It could be Japanese from the Osaka region. Whatever it is that we want to imitate, we're going to listen to it and over again in order to get that pronunciation in us. So, but some bits of advice. First of all, we should not be too influenced by our own writing system. So, if we are used to reading in English, we mustn't assume that Spanish pronunciation gives the same value to the writing, to the letters, as we do in English. I can remember being in Japan, and I introduced a Canadian English speaker to a Mr. Kato, and they said, Mr. Kato. I mean, I just finished saying Kato, and they say Kato. Ignore the value of the letters in your own language. The reverse is also true. Japanese people who learn English and who use katakana, use their own, or hiragana, their own, or usually katakana, their own writing system as a guide to the pronunciation in English, they will be in trouble. You have to rely on what you hear. You have to see the relationship between the language as written in the target language and the way it's pronounced. You have to focus on that and hear it. And if you do that enough, the brain will get used to it. So you can't pronounce correctly what you don't hear. So you, first of all, you have to get used to allowing yourself to hear how the language is pronounced without any preconceived ideas coming from your own language. Okay? Second of all, so to review here, you have to do a lot of reading and a lot of listening. Let the sounds bounce on your brain. You have to be open to the way the language is pronounced, not have preconceived ideas about how you think it should be pronounced based on your own writing system. And third of all, you have to want to. There has to be an emotional attachment to that pronunciation. Otherwise, there's a tendency to hang back in what's familiar, what's comfortable. But you have to be willing to say, okay, I am Chinese, I am Russian, I am French, and you pretend to be that nationality. You pretend to be a native speaker of that language. Even though you don't achieve it, you pretend to be it. There has to be that commitment to pronouncing, okay? All the while accepting the fact that you needn't be perfect, you needn't be accent-free, you want to speak well in the language, you want to pretend you are one of them, but you'll fall short, okay? You'll fall short. So that has to be a part of the equation. You can, like through a lot of listening, you will notice how the language is pronounced. You'll notice most things, but there are some things you won't notice. So I think it's a good idea to read sort of a description of pronunciation in this language. You can read it when you start out. It won't make much of an impression because you don't yet have a sense of the language. It might help a bit. I wouldn't try to nail anything down. And then at various times you can reread sort of an explanation of the pronunciation, and you may pick up a few things that will be helpful as you try to sort of notice and imitate the language. To me, that's the main thing. Be relaxed about it. Don't be hung up about it. The more relaxed you are, the better. The more you engage with the language, the better. The better you use the language, the better your pronunciation will be. The more you speak, the better you'll get. And you have to be open. You have to be open. One thing I should point out that's probably beyond the reach of many people, but is something that I'm convinced of, and that is that when we only have one language, say English or Japanese or French, then we are very much influenced by that language. If we learn a second language, we are now exposed to more sounds. And so therefore, when we go to learn a third or fourth language, we are more open, more flexible when it comes to sounds. So obviously, if you're learning your second language, then you are dealing with that problem. So you have to be as open as possible to the new sounds. If you choose to learn a third language, you'll probably find that pronunciation in that third language will be easier. So those are my bits of advice on pronunciation. Keep an open mind, continue your main input activities, speak as much as you can, don't worry about it, but allow yourself, pretend, like imitate, be the person of that language that you are learning. And good luck to you in your pronunciation. Bye for now.